2025 wasn't the year that things went wrong in Canada. It was the year the excuses stopped working. Because for many years, Canadians were told the same story: be patient, this is temporary, global forces is at play here, unprecedented times. But in 2025, something fundamentally changed in Canada. The math stopped cooperating with the narrative that we built. In essence, in modern language, the math stopped mathing. Rents didn't spike, they locked in. Wages didn't catch up, they fell behind permanently. Immigration stopped being a moral slogan and became an infrastructure stress test. And the institutions that were supposed to explain this, they didn't lie. They just kept speaking a language that people could no longer afford to believe. This isn't a year recap. I'm not listing headlines here like the CBC or CTV. I'm doing an autopsy here. 2025 didn't break Canada, it revealed it. The old story of effortless stability, endless capacity, and guaranteed prosperity for middle class. Growth without trade-offs within our system, and a system that could bend but never break. All of that is over in 2025. They all crumbled under the weight of a simple, undeniable reality. Now, the only question is whether or not we'll be honest enough to admit it. So to understand what ended in 2025, we have to talk about the illusion we were living under for a very long time and why that lasted for so long. Now, if you get any value from this video, I want you to click on the subscribe button and let's get into it. There are 5 important things I want to talk about in this monologue this time, but let's start with that great Canadian illusion. Because for many years, we were told by the political class we were managing trade-offs. But the truth is that we were actually borrowing from the future. And in 2025, the bill came in the mail and it came due and we had to pay. At the heart of it all was a big illusion that Canada could absorb infinite pressure without ever having to make any fundamental changes within our systems. We believed, for instance, that we could welcome historic number of immigrants without building historic number of homes or historic infrastructure. But in 2025, finally the government celebrated a plan to reduce the number of temporary residents to 5% of the population by 2026, which in my opinion is a basic admission of wrong, and that the system was at its breaking point finally. But that came only after a few years of record population growth and an infrastructure that was never ever ready or even built for such in the first place. We were also told in the Great Illusion in Canada that our economy was resilient even as we watched our biggest trading partner flirt with the idea of tariffs and questioning agreements that we've relied on for generations. On paper, the numbers looked fine. Headline inflation cooled to 2.2% by the end of the year, and some reports even show that the average wage began to outpace the inflation rate. But the official story felt like it was describing an entirely different planet. Official inflation was under control, but anyone paying rent, paying mortgage knew that that number was meaningless. Rent inflation on its own was about 4.7% by the end of the year, and for anyone trying to buy a new home, good luck to you. The market was a landscape of broken dreams and promises, and the national average for home price still sits well over 600,000. And let's not even talk about major cities like in Toronto and Vancouver, which prices went down in 2025, definitely, but that's because things were getting unaffordable and because there was an economic strain and a sluggish demand that was choking the market. The great illusion wasn't just economic, it was also institutional. We were told, for instance, to trust experts, trust the systems. But in 2025, the gap between rosy forecast and our daily lived experiences just became too wide to ignore. A system we realize that can say no to anything, eventually can say yes to the things that matter to people the most, like a roof over your head, food on the table, shelter for you, and the simple belief that your kids will have a better life than you did. Now let's talk about the fault lines within our system. Like I said here, my goal is not to list headlines. It's not to pitch red versus blue in political affiliations. It's actually to trace the edges within our system and find where cracks had set in 2025. Because when a structure is under enormous stress, the cracks will start to show slowly. But in 2025, four major fault lines is what I'm going to identify that showed and exposed the fragile bedrock of Canadian systems. The first fault line will be the cost of living and the quality of life. This was the year we stopped calling it inflation and we started calling it for what it is a relentless squeeze on our quality of life. The middle class lifestyle that was once the bedrock of the Canadian dream started to feel like a luxury item we could no longer afford. Official data told one story, but the lived experiences of people told a different one. The average raise that people had, even in their income, vanished once you took care of shelter, for instance. Rent ate up a chunk of people's income, and the dream of even owning a home for the younger generation has disappeared off of the table. And talking about our systems, you look at CMHC report that spells out the brutal math, for instance, that Canada needs to build about 500,000 homes yearly for the next decade to be able to reach affordability levels in 2019. That's roughly double the current pace. And yet, by the end of the year, housing stats actually showed that construction was trending downward. That's not a temporary bug in our system. It actually revealed a problem, a feature problem. This was a structural failure. The promise was never for Canadians to get rich. It was about a stable middle class life. But in 2025, millions of Canadians realized even that promise was broken. Faultline number two, immigration shifted from a virtue to a pressure cooker problem in 2025. Let me be clear about this from the start. This is not about blaming immigrants or shifting the blames to Canadians and pitching one people against the other. It's actually about the policy that got totally disconnected from real world consequences. Because for years, immigration was framed entirely around a moral good and an economic necessity and even a population growth necessity, with almost no mainstream conversation about actual capacity of the nation to welcome people properly and even integrate them into the Canadian system. 2025 was the year of quiet pivot by politicians because after years of record-breaking growth, the government finally announced the plan to cut non-permanent residents and stabilize the target, which ought to have been done since well over a decade ago. In my opinion, this was a quiet admission of wrong. It was a confession, an admission that the pressure on housing, on healthcare, on our services, on infrastructure had become too much that we can't ignore it anymore. The new rental construction was strong in places like the prairies, but it was a drop in the bucket when you consider the national average. The math just stopped adding up entirely in Canada in 2025. And when you refuse to talk honestly about the numbers, about the problems, the outcomes became even cruel to newcomers who were arriving to an impossible cost of living in Canada, and for residents who see the services, the systems they've relied on for generations being stretched to the absolute limits. Fault line number three, our institution authority and credibility was lost. Canadians by nature tend to trust the systems. We trust the Bank of Canada, for instance, the CMH for housing. We trust them. We trust our public institutions. But 2025 was the year that trust began to collapse. The disconnect was everywhere. You could tell when you talk to people in social and public gatherings. The Bank of Canada started cutting rates since a few years, but the average person struggling with housing costs, the rate cuts did almost nothing to help that. CMHC, for instance, will release reports confirming the need to double the pace for housing construction, while at the same time you see all the data showing that construction is actually slowing down in major cities. Now, it creates this surreal feeling of watching an institution perfectly described by starting a fire by itself and lacked the ability to quench that fire. This wasn't some grand conspiracy theory. It was simpler, it was sadder, and it was a loss of faith in our system. Because when the official story from our trusted institutions no longer matched the lived experiences of the people, the trust in the systems start to erode. It doesn't just vanish overnight. It gets spent. It's little by little, promise by broken promise, until there's nothing left in that bank of trust for Canadians to take out from. Fault line number four, our Politics became vibes and no competence, and I explained that to you. Don't crucify me yet. Canadian politics in 2025 felt less like a debate about how to run a country and more about a personal battle of brands between politicians. As real world problems pile up, our political class seemed more interested in scoring points in the culture war than actually making tough decisions and tough choices. Take, for instance, Canada hosted the G7 leaders in Alberta, trying to project an image of stability to the rest of the world. But back home, the mood was anything but stable. Domestically, the political landscape at that time, even during the G7 conference, was just holding a pattern where we saw a liberal government that was nearing the end of its term, with polls showing a frustrated country, don't forget about that, leaning towards a conservative opposition that had a simple but a powerful message about the cost of living. But in my opinion, there was no party out of the major ones that seemed willing to have an adult conversation about the actual trade offs for Canadians. You can't have, for instance, a record population growth, and you will have affordable housing with a massive state led building program. It just doesn't happen. You can have low taxes, as promised by the other party, and a massively expanded public services. Nobody talked about those trade offs. In 2025, more and more Canadians began to feel politically homeless because of this. They were stuck between parties offering different vibes, but no credible plan to just fix the basics and have conversations about what will be the actual trade offs for Canadians. We don't have a shortage of ideas in this country. We have a shortage of adults in the room who are willing to admit that you can have it all. You can have both worlds. Well, this is a comfortable point to actually point your attention to something. People ask me on this channel if this is about politics, and I often reply with not really. There's a lot of channels talking about blue versus red. I watch some of them. I don't have anything against them. But here, I actually talk about our systems, what still works in our systems, and what is broken that needs to be fixed, and how do we foster that change that can actually fix what's broken in our system. I go into the philosophical ideas behind why our leaders think the way they think, why even people like you and I think the way we think. How do we foster meaningful life, a purposeful life, and an impactful one, and leave a good legacy for the next generation? That is what I am concerned about on this channel, not blue versus red or people against people. It's actually balance, it's nuance, it's grounded conversations that I engage on this channel. So I welcome you, especially if you feel politically homeless. Click on the subscribe button. There's a lot we have planned for 2026. Let's get back into the conversation. So really, what did the people in charge miss this year? They mistook the Canadian silence for consent, first of all. They mistook our exhaustion for satisfaction. They looked at their spreadsheet showing inflation was technically under control, and they declared victory, hooray! While regular people like yourself, like myself, were looking at their grocery bills and bank statement and credit card statement, and despair sets in. Canadians aren't radical by nature. I don't think so. Canadians are just concerned. You remember 2024, there was supposed to be a massive protest that the police force talked about? That never happened. But it's not because Canadians are docile. The vast majority aren't asking for a revolution. They're asking for the system that they pay for to work for them. They want to be able to afford a decent place to live in the city that they work in, especially. They want to believe that their kids won't be poorer than they are. But the big shift in 2025 wasn't ideological, it was practical. It was the moment people stopped arguing about the solutions and just sort of gave up on the idea that anyone in charge was even listening to them in the first place. This was the quietest, but almost the most dangerous stage of civic disillusionment, you could say. It's not the loudest protest in the streets. It's actually a quiet resignation to fate. It's families making heart-wrenching choices to leave a province for another to be able to afford basic living. It's young people putting off having kids, not because they don't want them, can't imagine how they would afford them right now. It's the rise in the idea of side hustles, not as a passion project, but as a second or third job just to make rent and make ends meet in their families. All of that, which also tend to affect family life. When people stop shouting, it doesn't mean that they're happy with the situation. It often means that they've already left the conversation and they just checked out. The end of 2025, to get to the fourth idea here, is rather a springboard into the defining moments of 2026. And there's a reason why I say that, especially when you think about the new Trump's national security strategy, which, in my opinion, poses an immense danger to Canada's economic and geopolitical future. There's a whole lot in that document which I think media has not really engaged with to the level that it ought to. And that's why I have a number of conversations scheduled on this topic coming up in 2026. I believe the NSS document would actually impact our near future as Canadians, and in fact, our territorial sovereignty and even our economic powers in the role we play, even in this northern hemisphere. But I'll leave that conversation for the future. Click on the subscribe button so you don't miss out those conversations when they come in 2026. 2025 wasn't a year of chaos and collapse. It was a year of painful, sobering clarity. It was the year we were all forced to confront the broken math within our system, the illusion of effortless stability or growth without consequences, having it all without making any hard choices. All that story ended this year. The systems we were told to trust didn't suddenly break this year. They just finally stopped pretending to work for everyone. This clarity is uncomfortable, actually. It just forces everyone to ask tough questions about who we really are as a people and what kind of country we really want to build for ourselves and for the next generations. But you can't fix a problem that you refuse to see or acknowledge. The old story, those illusions in Canada, all of that is over. The real question now is whether we have the courage, the competence, the capacity, and the political willpower to write a new story for the future. Well, I want to know what fault lines you see that is deeper than the ones I mentioned, maybe deeper in your area, in your province, in your community. Let me know in the comment section. I actually respond to all comments that go beyond slogans. I respond to virtually all comments. But well, I wish you a prosperous year ahead. If I don't see you again, I'll see you in 2026. I'll take care. Bye-bye.